The Seiko Paradox. You see, Seiko are going through a weird moment right now where their watches are becoming less appealing to a lot of collectors. And this is partly down to Seiko themselves, but there's also some other factors at play. When I first started collecting watches back in 2020, Seiko were everywhere. Every watch channel reviewed Seiko watches, everyone had a couple of Seikos in their collection, and they were generally held in high regard by most enthusiasts. However, I think it's fair to say that Seiko's street cred has certainly dropped since then, and I think this can be put down to multiple things. Not one singular big thing has happened that has shifted people away, rather a number of things that have slowly chipped away at their desirability. In late 2019, Seiko relaunched the Seiko 5 range, discontinuing a lot of models that were wildly loved by collectors, and introduced them elsewhere among the catalogue with a slightly different look. And this is where we can trace the start of this paradox too. When Seiko discontinued the SKX and reintroduced it as a Seiko 5 with less water resistance and no ISO certification, it really annoyed a lot of collectors. All of a sudden, they were paying more for a worse watch. And this was the case with a lot of popular models. But almost every single one of these new watches had something in common. They almost all saw a big price increase. Seiko restructured their catalogue to develop tiers. The 5 range was their entry point, so the most affordable pieces. They introduced the Prospects line, which was sort of the next level up. Then we have King Seiko, the Presage line, the Astron, and of course Grand Seiko. So things all of a sudden just got a little bit more confusing. Now, I understand why Seiko did this. They wanted to create a little bit of structure within the brand. After all, they don't have 20 watch brands like the Swatch Group that they can position at different price points to have everything covered. And creating different model lines allows for a bit of a ladder that you could theoretically climb. Start off with a Seiko 5, then get a Presage, then you can go for a Prospex, then a King Seiko, and then eventually maybe a Grand Seiko. It allows for upgrades within the brand when clearly defining each watch with a price increase. One thing that coincided with this restructure is the discontinuation of an old movement. Seiko utilised the 7S26 in a lot of their older watches. This is the movement that they used in most of the old school 5 range and even the iconic SKX. Now that movement was certainly a little bit of a dinosaur when you compared it with others. It didn't feature hacking seconds and you couldn't even manually wind it, leading to the term Seiko Shuffle being coined to get the watch ticking before you strap it on wrist. So this discontinuation was needed, and Seiko replaced it with the 4R series, or the NH series, which in comparison is a lot more modern, now featuring hacking seconds and manual winding. The new 5 range no longer uses the 7S26 like old, it now uses the 4R36. But to a lot of collectors, this new movement wasn't worth the price increase, especially when other specs were either dropping, like the water resistance, or just staying the same, like the continued use of hardlex, otherwise known as mineral glass. And this is where the Seiko Paradox began. Around 2020, we saw the birth of a lot of new micro brands. Seiko almost left a gap in the market that needed to be filled. Islander is a perfect example of a brand that started this way. Long Island Watch used to sell all of the popular Seiko models, and they also used to sell parts so that you could make them better. A sapphire crystal that you could swap for the hardlex. They sold bracelets, clasps, end links that felt more solid than Seiko, and you could replace the 7S26 movement with an NH36. But then Long Island Watch thought of something that was very smart. Why don't we just create our own watch that already has all of these upgrades? It'll cost you less than a Seiko, and it looks like one too. And that's exactly what they did. So, for all intents and purposes, you could get a watch on your wrist that was better than the SKX in almost every single way. It would cost less than a Seiko, it just didn't have the Seiko branding. This was helped even more when Seiko restructured their catalogue and downgraded the water resistance of the 5KX, which just made Islander even more appealing. But the problem was so much bigger than that. With all of these new micro brands popping up left, right and centre, competition certainly got tougher. And I actually mean for Seiko. Because Seiko doesn't just retail watches, they also sell their movements. And they sell their movements for incredibly low prices. You can buy a brand new NH35 movement for $25. And that's the retail price for a single unit. You can for sure get them for even less when buying in bulk at wholesale. Which meant that all of these new micro brands had a super reliable movement that watch enthusiasts knew and trusted, available to them for a very good price. That meant that a micro brand could put a watch together with every specification an enthusiast could want, so sapphire crystal, ceramic bezel, 200 meters of water resistance, and a much better bracelet and clasp than Seiko, whilst using a mechanical Seiko movement. And they would cost less to buy than an actual Seiko watch. And this is the paradox. We now have Seiko watches that use the NH35 movement, costing around £400 retail. And we have micro brands that use the NH35 movement, typically have miles better specification than what Seiko are offering, and they cost less too. For example, let's take the Seiko Samurai SRPF03, NH35 movement, mineral crystal, aluminium bezel, and a pressed clasp for £399. Then let's take the Monroe Ocean Adventure, NH38 movement, highly domed sapphire crystal, ceramic bezel, fully milled clasp with on-the-fly adjustment for £280. So for £120 less, you objectively get a higher quality watch, which is powered by the exact same movements that you'll find in the more expensive Seikos. Now, of course, there's other factors involved here. You could mention things like quality control, but Seiko doesn't have the best reputation when it comes to that anyway. Lume for sure is one of Seiko's strongest points. They always have a fantastic Lume experience, but of course, let's be honest, it's the branding that you're paying for here. Seiko is a horological powerhouse, single-handedly ended the life of countless watch brands during the quartz revolution. So the question is, how much is the brand name on the dial worth to you? Because it's not just a question of £120, it's the all-round, objectively worst watch that you get. Now, of course, design is another big factor at play here. Personally, I'm a fan of Seiko watches. Not because of their unbelievable value or high level of finishing, because both, in my opinion, are average. But I think they've made some of the best looking watches of all time. The original SKX is a beauty. The Seiko Alpinist is simply gorgeous. The Seiko Cocktail Time range, well, that's just pure class. And I could go on for minutes with other watches that I think have nailed the designs from Seiko. But that's where micro brands, they're starting to catch up too. I recently reviewed the Ember Rocket, a sort of futuristic field watch, and it was just a beauty. Another watch powered by a Seiko automatic movement with every spec you could want whilst costing less than a Seiko. So logically thinking, branding and maybe designs are the only appealing thing about Seiko right now. Because as shown, they're clearly not the insane value propositions that they once were. But then we have another problem, and quite a big problem too. And that problem even has its own name. It's called Citizen. Over the past few years, Citizen has seriously kicked on. Back in 2020, Citizen were for sure a name floating around amongst the watch community, but one that I thought was a bit underrated. Right now, however, it's a different story. Citizen have been on a roll with their releases. The Soyosa, the Zenshin, the Tsukiyomi, the Navihawk 40, not to mention the endless options you get within each range. These watches often cost less than their Seiko counterparts, offer better specification, and all of them, like Seiko, feature in-house movements. Also, you get a lot of choice of titanium with Citizen, which you never seem to get with Seiko. I don't know why they don't touch it. So you don't just have endless choice when it comes to micro-brand options using Seiko movements. You also have another huge Japanese watchmaker with a serious horological history undercutting Seiko in terms of what's on offer. And Citizen doesn't have a silly 5 range that clearly indicates that you're buying one of the lower cost watches. All of them proudly display a clean Citizen branding on the dial regardless of whether the watch is £200 or £2,000. So why buy a budget Seiko 5 when you can buy a full-blown Citizen? So what's next? Well, I've certainly noticed a drop in production from Seiko, at least in terms of how many watches they're releasing. This was something discussed by Jody over at Just One More Watch. Only a handful have been released from Seiko so far this year, many of them well over the £1,000 mark. Why is this happening? Who knows? Maybe Seiko is going even more upmarket. Maybe they're struggling to shift the stock that they already have. Maybe they're waiting for this whole tariff situation to sort itself out before releasing anything big. Whatever the case may be, more and more collectors are buying watches that don't say Seiko on the dial. Seiko watches, specifically affordable ones, are becoming less and less appealing because of micro-brand competition using Seiko movements and big players like Citizen stepping on the gas. So share your thoughts on this Seiko situation in the comments below. Do you find Seiko watches as appealing as they used to be? Hit subscribe if you haven't already. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.